In this video I'll be starting work on this. It is the LRP-300 paper tape punch-in reader that I introduced in a recent video, and the intention is to fully restore it, get it fully functional, get the reader working, get the punch working. At the moment I believe that the punch drive motor or system is seized up. The reason I believe that is this is the piece of tape that was sticking out of it when I got this. And when you see a string of very close punched holes like this, it means the tape isn't coming cleanly through the mechanism. It's just advancing very slightly each time, and it's just over punching the same position. So it's not driving the tape properly. It could have been the tape was caught up, of course, but I have tried turning this by hand. I haven't put a lot of force on it, and it does seem extremely tight. So I don't want to power it up, could do a lot of damage to it, and in this video what I'll be doing is stripping it right down. The way I normally approach jobs like this is to completely dismantle the unit into its major sub-assemblies, and then I will go through each of those in subsequent videos, carry out any repairs that are needed, and then ultimately get the whole thing reassembled and see if it works. So step one, we'll get the cover off and then figure out how to get this apart. So I've never rebuilt one of these before, so it'll be a learning curve for us, and hopefully it'll be fairly interesting. It's an old rare machine, and I think it's well worth the effort to get it up and running. So we'll start by getting the outer cover off. The screws are already loose, and I did show you inside in the previous video, so this just lifts off. So as we dismantle it, we'll have a very brief look at each of the parts, but I won't go into too much detail right now. We'll look at them in more detail as I get back to each one and we start to carry out work on each of those parts. So I have taken some reference photographs, but I have the manual for this, so it shouldn't be too difficult, and if I do get lost along the way somewhere, it's a fairly basic machine, so it shouldn't be too difficult sorting out exactly how everything goes together. So we'll start by taking the screws out of the switch panel and see what's underneath that. Okay, so that's just the cover plate. And then what we have underneath this is the actual key panel proper. That seems to be plugged onto the main board, which it is. It's quite a nice arrangement. So up next we'll get the tape reader out. So there's just, it appears, 4 screws holding that to the main chassis, and a single plug. So we'll get the wire clip released. If I take the screws out, we should be able to get this out. Okay, so that's the tape reader. So next thing is we'll see if we can get the actual punch mechanism itself out. So there seems to be a few cables on this. We've got one going here. Okay, that's the cables unplugged. Again, I'll just unclip them from the guides. And what I can do now is disconnect the main drive motor. Okay, so we're just now are left with the ground screw, and what I'll do is I'll get the screws out that are holding the mechanism in place, and I'll take the ground strap off once I can spin the mechanism around. So I'm not too worried about upsetting the alignment of this at the moment. It'll probably need realigning by the time I've rebuilt it anyway. So I'll just take these screws out, and then we'll get the entire mechanism lifted out. Okay, so this should now lift out. And we just need to disconnect the ground lead. Okay, and that's the punch mechanism. So again, I'll go over this in more detail in an upcoming video. It does need some attention. I can see that a few of the parts are quite worn, so that should be quite an interesting one to work on. So the next thing to come out is the power supply. It's already unplugged, and in theory all I need to do is remove the bolts that hold it in place. Again, I'm going to take them off the chassis rather than the top, so it should be quite easy getting the supply out. It's just a case of removing the 3 nuts that hold it in place, and then it should just lift out. Okay, so that's the supply assembly. You can see all the power devices on the bottom. They'll look to be intact, but we'll test this separately to the rest of the system, make sure the supplies are working before we try powering up the main electronics. And then finally we just need to get the PCB out, and we've then got it stripped down to the bare chassis. Okay, so that's the board removed. Quite a substantial assembly. And as I said, it's so complicated because it's all discrete logic, but we'll go over how this works in a future video. And then the last thing we'll do is just get the brackets off the main chassis. I'll do that so I can clean it properly, but also I want to paint, strip and repaint this reader support. It's a bit rusty, so it could do with freshening up. So I'll just get the remaining screws out of the way. Okay, so that's the unit completely stripped. We've got all the brackets out of the way. Power supply, the punch subassembly, the reader subassembly, PCB, and the control panel. So quite a nice unit to work on so far. Didn't have to remove too many screws. It all came out fairly easily. The front panel is in quite good condition, needs cleaning, but I think it should clean up fairly well. And I think the entire machine is likely to come up in a very good condition. I will of course check all the components on the supply, and so in the next video in this series we'll look at this supply. We'll take it out of the sub-chassis that it's in, check the capacitors, and then we can power the power sub-assembly up and see if it gives us the voltages we expect. I do have the schematics, so we can compare it against that to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to. Make sure all the output voltages meet the requirement, and then we can start to reassemble the unit. What I'll probably do is go through the punch in a separate video, the reader in another video, and then we'll look at the electronics in yet another video and see if it's all working, and then hopefully end up with a decent punch. I haven't decided what to do with the outer case yet. I may retrobrite it, I may just clean it. It might be that the outer case would be better suited to a mechanical clean rather than chemical, but we'll look at that in a future video. But certainly quite an interesting machine. Any comments welcome. If you want to see any particular aspects of testing on this, then please let me know.